And I feel like that is very valuable for creatives who provide some sort of service like photo or video work where it's not just your work, your feed isn't just a portfolio of here's what I can do for you, but it's actually like showing who you are and that you can actually know how to connect with people.
Hmm.
Because ultimately that's what you're being hired for with even creating photography or videography, any sort of like visual asset. Like a client wants to be able to connect to their audience in some way, and they want to reach out to the people who know how to connect to people.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. You will absolutely love my guest today. His name is Jordan Hughes, and I'm pretty sure that you have seen his incredible, mind-blowing beverage photography on Instagram. In fact, he's a photographer, he's a videographer, a recipe developer for drinks and beverages. Like, that's his niche. He literally started his Instagram and his blog in 2017. And since then, he's been featured in Forbes, Askmen, Liquor.com, Wine Pair. He was also awarded the Saveur Magazine 2019 Instagram Best Drinks Award. And just a few months ago, he was on NBC's The Today Show. How awesome is that? And if that's not enough, he's also the author of a cocktail book called Twist, Your Guide to Creating Inspired Craft Cocktails. I mean, this guy is just awesome. And I am so pumped for our conversation because Jordan has this real energetic personality, but also he has built a beverage photography career from scratch, a business from scratch. And you know how passionate I am about this topic, right? So Jordan is a brilliant beverage photographer, videographer. His Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everything is full of these vibrant videos which are funny and inspiring and at the same time entertaining. So he has basically taken beverage photography to a whole another level. No one can talk about beverage photography without taking his name. And I'm not exaggerating, which is why I feel like, we get so caught up in food and food photography that sometimes we have that little passion in us that gets lost or is unseen. And Jordan found that passion, he honed it, and he turned it into a thriving business. And today he's going to tell us all about how he did it, what it took, and for anyone who finds their passion in beverage photography or in photography in general, in a creative field, how can they turn it into a successful business? Jordan is a king at beverages, but I feel like there is a message in this episode. So if you are stuck at a certain point in your creative career, or you're finding answers to questions, or you are thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get started? I don't have much experience. Please hold on and listen to Jordan's story. This conversation is going to change a lot about how you approach your creative career. All right, with that, I hope you've got a drink ready because come on, we cannot have a conversation with Jordan without a drink in our hand. I've got my tea ready and I'm all set to welcome Jordan. So let's go. Hi, Jordan. Today, you and I are on a video call, and I just want to show you something that I have prepared exclusively for our conversation.
Oh my
Ta-da!
goodness. What
All
is
right,
that?
so definitely not water. I prepared
Oh,
myself
here.
a herbal iced tea in a fairly
Oh,
fancy glass, not up to your standard, but it's
all
got some
right.
fresh lemon garnish and it's got some fresh mint
Nice.
leaves from my garden. So I just want to let you know that I'm going to be fully immersed in this beverage. I'm also going to be fully immersed in our conversation about beverage photography and the business, just so you have no doubts. All right. So, with that,
I
cheers,
love
Jordan,
it.
and welcome to
Love
my
it.
Food Lens podcast.
Thank you so much. I forgot I poured a drink right over here.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yours looks a lot fancier than mine. This is I don't know if it'll even come through in my. It's a clarified milk punch, so it's been like clarified, so it has like lime juice, a bunch of spices in there, cognac, rum, but it's something that you can kind of like keep in your fridge and pour over ice whenever you
Yes.
want. So it tastes really good, but yours is much more ornate and
Oh,
beautiful
no,
looking
mine
than
is
mine.
very
So
herbal. I love yours. And I'm just virtually doing a cheers to you right now and saying
hey,
a big
cheers.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'm excited.
Fantastic. It's 8:30 in the night for you. So that beverage
Yeah.
totally makes sense.
Yeah,
All right.
totally.
So,
So
Jordan, I want to start with things that we know about you. And we know, the world knows that you are so brilliant at photography. You are such a prolific content creator. But there's something very specific about you that resonates with me. And I think it's when you put yourself out there, you don't fear judgment. I mean, that's how I see you when I see you on screen. So every time I like open my Instagram or something, I see your reel, I see you being fun, goofy, sometimes sarcastic.
yeah.
Yeah, targeting a few people, but all in the light of education or bringing out good information or the right information. And I feel like there are so many creators out there who feel like if they are educators, they cannot be funny, they cannot be goofy, and they will never
Right.
be seen, as serious educators. But you don't do that. And I absolutely love it. So we know that you are a brilliant photographer. We know that you're a prolific content creator, and we know that you don't fear judgment. But I'm pretty sure there are some things we don't know about you. So why don't you start us with something fun that, probably we don't know?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, what do people not know? I mean, part of the kind of high proof preacher story, I guess, that always kind of makes people go like, "Oh, what was so before doing this, like I wasn't a bartender, even though all of my content and education, a lot of it revolves around cocktails or taking pictures of cocktails. I was actually a pastor at a church before this. So that's kind of part of the high proof preacher name was kind of like this callback to kind of my previous life in a way.
Amazing.
um, which
Oh,
definitely feels kind of like a weird, like going from pastor to, taking pictures of booze for a
yes.
living, is just like not exactly a linear career path. But yeah, that's where like the name has just kind of stuck, and it's kind of like a fun conversation starter of like, oh, because people are like, so you used to be a bartender. I was like, no,
No.
actually.
Wow. It is a fantastic conversation starter. I think it's a fantastic start to our episode today because I would absolutely love to know how you ended up being around booze then.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'm based in Portland, Oregon, so west coast of the US. The city has a lot of great bars, a lot of great distilleries. Basically, I kind of got into it just, basically into making cocktails, just kind of as a hobby. Just got to know different bartenders or different friends who made drinks and, started picking up books and tips from them. And then photography was always kind of like this, also another hobby of mine, always kind of a side thing. Didn't really think at the time that that would be a career for in photography. A lot of my friends are wedding photographers. So I always kind of thought, well, if you're going to be a career photographer, you have to photograph weddings.
Mm.
And I'm all for I am married, like all weddings are great. I just was not interested in photographing them. So I was like, that doesn't appeal to me. But as I kind of got into making cocktails, again, as a hobby, it was kind of combining two different hobbies. It was like, well, I'm at least decent at taking photos, and then I'm decent at coming up with drinks. And I just started like taking pictures of the drinks I came up with and sharing them on social media and blogging about them and all of that. And then from there, it was like I kind of started getting noticed by some local like distilleries, kind of really small, I don't know if you could even call them liquor brands, as they're just, small local distilleries who are like, hey, like, we really like the drinks you're making, oftentimes with these local spirits. So they're like, would you want to come by our distillery and get a tour? Maybe we could talk about hiring you to shoot some stuff for our social media or to help us with some marketing stuff. So that's kind of how I got started, of just kind of like sharing the stuff that I was passionate about. I was like, I'm excited about making cocktails. I was also very much like learning as I went. So it was also like inviting people into my learning process is part of it. And that's part of why people blog and Instagram in the first place, right? Where it's like, I'm learning this. I'm not necessarily an expert, but like inviting people in on what I learned and sharing what I learned. So from there, I feel like it just kind of was a snowball of just kind of started working with some local companies and some local bars, some restaurants. And then from there, I started, getting connected with some agencies and some bigger brands. And yeah, that's kind of the long, short version, at least, of how I got into it.
So my biggest takeaway here is that being a pastor can be quite stressful and you need a cocktail more than every once in a while. Is that right?
True. Yeah, totally. So
no, my biggest takeaway is really that when people say that you are truly passionate about something, it kind of resonates with them as well. And you start emerging as that expert in their eyes as well. So it sounds like, you loved what you did and people saw that and they started approaching you and not the other way. So that's fabulous.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
at what point do you think that, okay, I'm done drinking as a pastor. I've got to start taking this seriously. And this photography thing could really be something. At what point did that happen?
Yeah. So that happened. I mean, for me, like, I'd worked at a church for a few years and kind of got to a point where I was like kind of burnt out, was kind of just like ready for a change, was like, I need to do something kind of totally different for a while. And I didn't really know what that was when I made the decision to leave that job. My wife, Ellie, was working in a marketing job at the time and was very gracious enough to be like, hey, like, not necessarily like, hey, I'll float you. Like, still to figure stuff out, but she was very much like very gracious in allowing me kind of time and space to kind of figure out my stuff. And for a while, I kind of was like trying a bunch of different things. Like I was trying to do some graphic design work, some web design with a friend who did that. And I was doing various photography jobs, not all drink related. So it was kind of just a time of figuring out like, okay, what do I want to do? What am I interested in, but also what pays the bills, so it's trying to figure out what overlaps, which is a challenge for probably most, self-employed creative, right? Where it's like, there's things I'm excited about, but those don't necessarily always pay the bills. So I feel like I kind of got lucky a little bit in that the stuff I was getting noticed for or getting recognition for was like the cocktail photography and the cocktail imagery I was producing and the recipes I was making, because I was like very much enjoying that and doing that as a hobby anyway. And it turned out like I wasn't a very good graphic designer, wasn't very good at web design, even though I thought that would be the moneymaker for me. But it was like, well, I'm really good at this photography side and this cocktail side. And that seems to have some momentum. So I was like, well, what if I just kind of focus on that and at least see where that goes for a little bit? So yeah, so it wasn't like I, quit the church job and went into cocktail photography. It was a little bit of kind of this awkward time of figuring out what worked.
And how long back was that? How many years back?
That was like 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been going at it probably like around 6 or 7 years now of doing this as like my, my career. So
amazing. And I feel like you just, it's not just that you found a gap in the market. Like beverage photography was definitely 6 years ago, a gap in the market, but it was also something that you felt so strongly about and it was just the right fit.
Yeah.
I would completely agree for you to say that you've been lucky. I feel like luck has very little to do with this. It's all about hard work and, and putting yourself out there. You were willing to take that leap and that chance.
Yeah.
And also giving yourself that kind of, does this work? You tried out so many other things. So it wasn't like, oh my God, this is not working. Oh my God, you're like, okay, this is not working. Let's try this. And you were giving yourself a fair chance. So I love that.
Sure.
But, in the beginning, like you said, money is everything when you're starting off a business. And especially if you have a family, And it can be actually one of the reasons why people don't even take up photography or any creative field as a career. So you did find a lot of clients, who were into beverage photography, but at any point, like you were thinking about wedding photography, or maybe food, or maybe product. A lot of food photographers I know, they definitely venture into product photography. And it's only so they have more clients, they can broaden their niche, and they can, make a bit more money. But for you, it seemed like you found that one thing, and you were like, I'm just going to keep going at it and make it something. Did it ever strike you, or did you ever feel, oh my God, this is never going to take off, I need to add more things to my repertoire? Did it feel like that?
Not necessarily. I mean, for a while, it's like, it wasn't necessarily all cocktail stuff or liquor stuff. Like, for a while, I also worked for like a tea company, all basically beverage related stuff. So it's like, even just within the umbrella of beverage, there's a lot of stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be alcohol for me to photograph it, but
I've just been kidding. I'm sorry, I've just been kidding.
no, totally. But that's where, like, even with that pretty broad, like when we say food photography, like the food world is so broad, and there's so many different kinds of brands and companies and potential clients within that, including the product side, but then the restaurant side. And that's where I feel like with the beverage side as well, like that overlaps with food a lot. I feel like a lot of times when I'm hired by a bar or restaurant, I'm photographing the drinks, but I'm also photographing their food. So there is overlap for sure. Mm-hmm. But in the beverage side, I do feel like there is like this unique, it is kind of a unique skill set where it's like you're capturing something that is, see-through or reflective, whether that's the glassware or the bottles, where it's like a rounded surface that oftentimes bottles and labels have like gold foil. And, there's a lot of really unique challenges when it comes to capturing a beverage, or capturing ice, or capturing liquid in motion, or citrus oil, so there's all these little things that are, I feel like, pretty unique versus like, some of my friends who have, been shooting weddings for forever and then trying to do beverage photography, they're like, whoa, this is like a whole other world. Similarly, where I'm like, if I tried to shoot a wedding, I'd be like, that it's a whole different skill set, everything I shoot fits on a tabletop versus like, so it is just like, it truly is like a different niche. But like I said, how I kind of was like, well, I'm going to see how this works. And if this works, and kind of the more I dive into it, I feel like the more things I discover, or the more opportunities I discover, to where like, oh, I haven't really felt a need yet to broaden it. And like you said, there are things like, product photography definitely fits in there, because you're often capturing cocktails with a product or a bottle or something. So there are some really natural things that overlap to where it isn't strictly a beverage or a cocktail. But I've found just kind of being in this specific focus has been really good for me. And something I plan on continue doing. So,
and I think that's very encouraging for anyone who's listening to this. And it's that if you just keep going at what you truly, truly love, at some point you definitely emerge as the expert. And, there are definitely clients for everyone out there. There's some client for everyone. So people see that. I think it's so encouraging for someone to hear your answer here. So when I started this conversation, Jordan, I said that you are a prolific content creator, right? And I'm pretty sure that I'm not the first person to say this, because every time I open my feed, I have something or the other of yours, whether it's a still photo or a video or a reel or something that pops up, and I'm like, how is he doing this? You could be traveling, you could be doing client work, but you always have content ready for your audience. So I kind of want to get into a little bit about, how maybe what your thought process is, or how you batch your work, or how you organize yourself. Just something that gives our listeners that, just because they're doing client work doesn't mean that they can't have regular content. And just because they're doing regular content doesn't mean that they have to give up on client work. So just walk us through your process a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance, right? Because like client work is what pays the bills, right? So it makes sense to be focusing on that. And there is this weird side of like, oh, but I also have to create work just for my social media that doesn't necessarily pay me immediately, but there is like this, level of value of putting yourself out there, right? and I'm sure we'll get into this too, of like, to be a successful photographer, it's not like you have to be a social media person, or I don't think you do. Like, I certainly know very successful photographers who they're like, I share some stuff on social media every now and then. It's not necessarily their focus. But yeah, for me, it's like, it's something that I have a lot of fun with. There's that side of it where I'm like, if you're not having fun, then it's like probably not worth it. But it is something where there is this level of people getting to know you as a person, and within reason. Of course, it's like 30-second videos or photos where it's oftentimes a little skit or something kind of goofy I'm doing where it's a little bit of an act sometimes, but kind of over time you just kind of get a sense of someone's sense of humor, or what they're about or what they value. And I feel like that is very valuable for creatives who provide some sort of service like photo or video work, where it's not just your work. Your feed isn't just a portfolio of here's what I can do for you, but it's actually like showing who you are, and that you can actually know how to connect with people, because ultimately that's what you're being hired for, with even creating photography or videography, any sort of like visual asset. Like a client wants to be able to connect to their audience in some way, and they want to reach out to the people who know how to connect to people. So I feel like something where like, yeah, like me making a few reels or a few social media posts, it's not necessarily like, okay, this isn't like deliverables for a client, but being kind of consistent and showing up on social media and kind of building this relationship with an audience, it is kind of this social proof for clients of like, oh, this person knows how to connect with people, their work already connects with people. Again, it's not like that's the only way to stand out or to do it as a photographer, but that's at least how I view it and how I approach it. And at least with creating content, it's still kind of figuring out the right balance of I do try to set like Mondays are kind of my admin and like organic content day, where I kind of sit down and think through like, okay, what are a few fun video ideas I can do realistically that I can shoot in like one afternoon sort of thing, so I honestly don't plan like too far in advance, just because I'm like got a lot of other things going on. So I kind of take it 1 week at a time. And sometimes there are weeks where I don't put a whole lot out there. So hopefully you just don't notice during those weeks, but then there's weeks where I'm like, I just have feeling really inspired and have all these ideas for videos or for TikToks or whatever. And I can kind of make a bunch of stuff, and then I'll just kind of post it throughout the week and try to shoot it as much as I can on 1 or 2 days, just so it doesn't take up the whole week.
So you do batch. You do batch when you have the energy, you're feeling it, you're like, let me just leverage that. And
yeah, so definitely, especially when it comes to video stuff, just because it's like you're setting up camera, you're setting up, have just like a little wireless Rode mic, so it's like I'm wired up, setting up lighting, so I try to just, while I have everything set up, what are a few different things I can do here? Maybe I'll like change shirts just so it doesn't look like I shot it all on the same day, little stuff like that, but which doesn't even really matter that much. But yeah, so I do try to kind of batch some stuff, and then also mix in some client work as well too, because it is, especially now with social media, with TikTok and Instagram Reels, so much of it's very video focused. So I feel like now I'm like, oh, I kind of have to remind people like, yeah, I'm a professional photographer. Here's some of my work.
All right.
So that's something too, where when I go on shoots, probably more for bars and restaurants, I just have like a little smartphone tripod that like packs down, fits in my bag, and I pretty much always now like take a time lapse of me setting up my light, shooting with the bartender, whether I use it or not. Like, that's just easy kind of behind the scenes content. And especially with video, people love seeing like how you set something up, and then like literally just playing like 4 to 5 seconds of that, and then cut to a few images from like the shoot that are like final edited photos. And I feel like that's a really easy way to remind people like, hey, I actually do this photography thing for a living, and it's like fun content. Like, people like seeing, oh, this is how you set it up, here's how you lit it, oh, and here's some photos from the shoot. Literally takes me like no extra time, just setting up my phone and hitting record while I work, and then do a quick edit afterwards. So that's kind of another way for me to kind of keep regular content coming because I'm always shooting or I'm always working with somebody. So I might as well record a few seconds of behind the scenes and use that. So yeah, so those are kind of two different ways, I guess, that I try to pump out a lot of content.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a commercial photographer as well. So I'm out shooting for restaurants and clients on the site. And many times we have models and we have these quirky models and there's fun stuff happening. So sometimes I have, other people in my team, but sometimes if I am the only person, then I do exactly the same. It's just a phone tripod. You carry it, you just place it, you ask your client, there might be a bit of disruption, but they're all fine. And then you end up with, I just feel it gives even prospective clients an insight into your energy and the experience of working with you. So it's not just content creation for social media, but it's actually also an insight into your working style. So I love that. I love that tip. But since we have you here, Jordan, I think my audience will kill me if I don't ask you this one question. And that is that before we get into all the businessy stuff, can you leave us or start us off with about 3 top tips of yours to improve, drinks photography? Yeah, just start us with that.
Yeah, I'd say the first one is kind of based off of kind of a question I get a lot where people always ask, like, what do you do about reflections? How do you get rid of reflection in glassware or bottles? And I usually tell people, like, don't get rid of them. Reflections are your friend. That's what I tell people, because reflections are, oftentimes that's your flashes reflecting in there, or a window, oftentimes it's like, oh, that makes it not as pretty, or there's something covering up a label. And for me, it's never thinking like, how do I get rid of it? It's more like, how do I use them better? Because reflections also add dimension to your images, to your glassware, to your bottles, like that often can help reveal like the texture of the ice or of the glassware. It like gives it more of a 3D look to where you actually know what it looks like or what it feels like. So for me, it's more like figuring out like, okay, how can I then use those reflections to my advantage? Like whether that's changing my camera angle or point of view, or whether that's, this is a photo of my old studio where it's like putting up a big scrim to diffuse the light and shaping the light. It's more about like shaping those reflections and manipulating them to make your images look even better. So that's more like, it's more of just kind of a perspective shift of like, instead of looking on how can I just get rid of those or edit those out in Photoshop, it's more like, well, how can I shape them and use them to make my subject look even better?
Wow, interesting.
So that's a fun one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of, because that's just one of the questions I get all the time. It's like, how do I get rid of reflections? How do I edit them out?
Yeah, that's real perspective shifting in beverage photography. Like to use your highlights and reflections in a way that work for you. That's such a different way of looking at it, especially because you said that, I don't know, do you shoot with artificial light when you are on the set? You do.
Yeah, I do most of the time. So this shot was my background. Listeners, if not watching this, probably can't see it, but do a lot of different flashes. And then I feel like for the few years I was shooting in my garage, I just got super into shaping lighting, and like, I have all these poster boards blocking light, and then these reflectors, and because everything was like, there were no windows in my garage. So I had, if there was light or reflections, it was stuff I built myself. So I feel like I just got really into that very micro level of it, of like every reflection, every light, every shadow is something I've created. So I have to be really intentional about it, So as hard as it was shooting in a dark cave of a garage for a few years, I feel like it just helped me really learn how to light and how to do it well when it comes to cocktails, at least. So even with shooting in bars and now with the studio with windows, it's like I still it's in some ways gotten a little easier having some natural light, but in the same way, it's like I'm all about that control of like, I can add a light here, or I can add a black flag here to add shadow. So I'm just very like particular about my lighting now. Yeah.
And I feel like beverage, just because you said it's a see-through glass, or it's less forgiving. So you really have to have that control. All right. So our first tip was that definitely make your highlights work for you, or your reflections work for you. What else?
Yeah. Next one, I guess just encouraging people that, you don't have to have a full bar or all these crazy ingredients to do beverage photography, because that's where like it's fun showing my setup where I've got a wall full of bottles, and it's like fun showing that, but at the same time I get kind of like, but I don't want people to think like you have to have all that to do this. Because yeah, for starting out, it's like I didn't have all that. That was like years and years of kind of building up a collection, and also client sending me stuff and all. So it's like but a lot of that, it's not like I use that every day. Even for photography purposes, it's like you don't even have to make a real cocktail. That's where
True.
it's like a lot of my kind of students in my own courses and stuff have talked about like using different colored teas, or I did a tutorial on YouTube about using like soy sauce to
Exactly.
fake whiskey. A lot of
Yeah.
photographers have done that, and different like
Yeah.
seasoning sauces and stuff.
Yeah.
And all of that just to be like, I feel like trying beverage photography, cocktail photography, whatever beverage, it's like it's a pretty easy to get started. So that's where I want to make it feel like accessible to people, where even food photography, it's like you have to make a dish, you have to be good at making food, and as fun, as awesome as it is, I'm like a horrible cook, so I'm like, for me it's easy to kind of whip up a cocktail, or to put some red liquid in a glass and make it look appetizing. It's just, I feel like it's a little more little lower barrier of entry if you want to try it out and see if it's something you like. So so I guess that tip is simply like, you don't have to have a ton of ingredients or spend all this money on bar stuff to do this. You can really just go for it with, you could use juice even, the camera's not going to be able to tell.
True.
Certain times it will, like when there's movement, sometimes you can tell that a spirit is usually a little more viscous, in appearance. So that would kind of be the second one. And then third, I mean, I'm trying to think of like the most essential ones, because there's a whole bunch of rabbit holes I could go down. I know we've talked a bit about lighting with talking about reflections and everything, but like one of the things I tell people is like, if you're going to be a photographer, like you're forever an obsessive observer of light. Like that's your thing now. Like wherever you go, you're going to be noticing, or you should be noticing light. For me, it's like oftentimes in restaurants or bars, because that's often where I'm shooting. It's like I'm seeing like, okay, like, oh, this is some beautiful light streaming through this window in the afternoon. Like this is the time to shoot here, versus when I'm in a hotel in like a banquet hall with fluorescent lighting, and like, this is not the place to shoot, know? So it goes beyond just that. But always just kind of being aware of, what lighting is like in different locations, different time of day, all of that, like versus, the light being really hard direct light or really soft and diffused. I feel like that's just something for every really good photographer, just kind of has that kind of running in the background in your mind in a way. But it starts out, I feel like starting out, you have to be really intentional about it and be like, okay, like everywhere I go today, I want to notice the light and what's the light doing. And if I was to shoot here for a location, it's like there's certain times a day that may be a good time to shoot there based on the lighting, or there's certain times that might not be a good time to shoot. So that's kind of a core one for me, of just like you're forever an observer of light wherever you go.
Absolutely.
And just kind of having that always running in your brain is really helpful.
And I think you brought up such a great point, and that is, it's not just the quality of light or the mood or feel that you want to create in your photos, but also how your light is interacting with your subject. So if you're shooting a glass of wine, the way light interacts with that is so different from a glass of margarita, and frozen margarita versus margarita on the rocks. It's completely different the way light interacts. So you're not just observing the quality and the feel and the mood of the light, but you are observing your subject. And that is what actually builds your skills later. So I feel like true for food or beverage, like light is your backbone, really, right?
Totally.
Love it. But
sure.
Tell me, so you said that you do photography and you do videography. And what I really like is that you've just laid it out on the table that, you know what, You don't need 1,000 bottles of liquor, and you don't need the most expensive things to make, fancy cocktails. What about videos? Like, how about gear rather? Do
Yeah.
you need fancy gear? Do you need a lot of equipment? Do you need different equipment for photos and videos? Like, what should a starting person who's getting into beverage photography really own?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a range, as you know, of cameras. Are like starting with a few $100s up to thousands of dollars. It's tricky, right? Because I feel like there's a certain level of, I think starting out, I kind of figured like, okay, at some point I'll just have everything I need and
Yeah.
I'll be it. And it's like, no, like there's always a new lens, there's always a new light, there's always something that you need or want, right? So
right. But I
it's been
guess,
fun.
I guess, Jordan, I think it would be very, very helpful to know, is it different for photos and videos? I think
Right.
tell us a bit more about that.
Totally. Yeah. So I would say for lighting, it's pretty different, mainly
Mm-hmm.
because I use a lot of strobes, where it's
Mm-hmm.
not continuous lighting. So a lot of these like studio strobes have like modeling lamps where, it's like a very dim light to just so you can kind of plan where your flash is, how the light interacts with your subject and all of that. But it's generally not bright enough for doing video. So that's where I do have continuous LED lights, which look very similar to the big strobes. And,
Mm-hmm.
they just produce really bright, consistent light that I can often dim down or change the color temperature. So that's probably the biggest difference is just like, there are like combo units, some that do flash and continuous light.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them are decent. Generally ones that kind of try to do too many things, I just tend to avoid just because I'm like, all right,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of buy right or buy twice sort of thing, where you tend to outgrow certain products pretty quickly, once you
Mm-hmm.
get into it. So it's like, might as well spend a little extra on a dedicated video light. It's likely going to last a lot longer. One of the brands I like using is Nanlite. They do a lot of great continuous LED video light, really good build quality, a little more expensive than some entry level brands, but
Mm-hmm.
just built way more strong. And they like all come with like insulated, carrying bags for when you're taking it around on set and stuff. So that's been a brand I've really been happy with for video lighting. So
Nice.
that's a big difference. And then
Mm-hmm.
with, cameras, of course, most modern digital cameras also shoot video. So,
Yeah.
if you shoot photos, I would say to like start with your same camera, and then kind of as you get going, you'll probably discover some limitations versus like I'm on the Sony Alpha system, so I have various Sony mirrorless cameras, which are all really great for video, but there's certain ones where I don't know how far we want to get into settings and stuff, but something with video is your frame rate, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
shoot at a really high frame rate allows you to slow down your footage to get
Mm-hmm.
that cinematic, slow, buttery look. So oftentimes, certain cameras, they can't shoot at full resolution at a really high frame rate. So if you want to get that really high frame rate, you have to lower your resolution. So then you're like, you get the nice smooth slow-mo, but
Yeah.
it's not 4K or it's not HD. You kind of lose the crisp
Mm-hmm.
look. So that's where a lot of the more expensive dedicated video cameras. So now I use a Sony FX3, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
their like entry level cinema camera, but still like very powerful camera, probably overkill for shooting like social media stuff, but
Yeah.
that allows me to shoot at a very high frame rate at 4K. I can get all that resolution and get this nice cinematic look that I'm going for. But um
Mm-hmm.
again, it's like there's that huge range. It's like I've seen some incredible videos from people who are shooting on very entry level equipment.
Yeah.
It's very much about figuring out how to use what you have really well. And it's like,
Yeah.
even if there's something where you're like, okay, I can't shoot at 4K at 120 frames per second, well, that's okay. Figure out like how can you still make it look really cool and cinematic even if you don't have that full 4K
Mm-hmm.
capability,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're all looking at stuff on our smartphones anyway. It's like probably okay if it's not 4K, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like not
yeah.
everyone's going to notice. So, so there's always that
Hmm.
balance of like, there's a lot of cool things you can do with nicer gear, but
Right.
um, especially for getting started out, it's like figure out how to use what you have really, really well. And then
Yeah,
once you're aware of limitations, or once you're kind of feeling like, oh, like I wish I could do this, then look at
exactly.
upgrading, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. Just like you layer your skills, you layer your gear, you add
right.
it one at a time. And till you don't know what you can't do, you don't know what is the gap in what you
Right.
own.
Totally.
Okay, fantastic. And how do you see the future? Like, do you see a lot more demand for videos from your clients or still photos 50-50? Like, what would you say is the ratio of videos to photos from a client work demand?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the demand for video has gone up, at least with clients who I'm doing stuff for social media content, especially. But honestly, there's still been a lot of demand for photos too. I don't know quite if I could put an exact percentage on it, because I think it's also depends on how you position yourself too, because that's where like I've become very much known as the photo guy, you know, and it's like, oh,
Okay.
you do these type of photos, so I very
Mm.
much get asked for that. But you know, just with doing more video stuff, I've kind of been putting more video out there.
Hmm.
So I've been getting more asks for video too, but even when it's a client coming in wanting video, typically they're always like, oh, and we'd also love X amount of photos. It tends to be like a both and thing oftentimes, where it's, you know, quite a few photo asks, and then the video asks coming in are also like, oh, let's figure out how to add some photos to the deliverables too.
Ah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's at least how it's been for me. And yeah, like I said, it does kind of depend how you market yourself, or the kind of stuff you put out there, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like will kind of
Yeah.
attract the people who want that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I feel like it's kind of worked out for you exactly like that from the beginning. It's who you've been
Yeah.
attracting by just doing what you love.
Yeah.
But how was it like? I was on your website and I was like, how do I get in touch with Jordan? How do I get him on the podcast? All right. So I got this contact me page and I'm like going through it, and then it says that we are currently not taking projects under $5,000.
Oh.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct? Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's amazing. You have a cutoff, you have a benchmark, and you know exactly what you're looking for. I thought that was incredible, you know. So I'm sure that it didn't start like that. And I'm sure that, you know, even when you were getting all the distilleries and all those clients who are coming to you that, hey, can you do a photo shoot for us? Even then, you were like, what if I could work with ABC client? Or what if I could work with
Right.
them? Maybe I want to do that. So how have you built your client list, you know, to this point where you can have this very solid criteria that I don't take projects below $5,000? Like, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is just like, I mean, yeah, I've been very fortunate to be busy. And that isn't necessarily like all the time. Like sometimes there's, you know, certain points of the year, oftentimes the beginning of the year, I feel like for most photographers is kind of a slow time where a lot of clients or brands are kind of reassessing their budget sort of thing, you know. So that's kind of the few months to go on a vacation or update your website or whatever, you know. But
Yeah.
um I feel like I've just been fortunate to have a, you know, a lot of people who I've worked with or have, you know, recommended me to a lot of people. For me, I feel like a big piece has been kind of getting in with a few different agencies, versus just thinking like, okay, here's this brand or this one client, where agencies are the people that all the brands hire, you know, they usually have
True.
their own client list.
True.
So it's like if you can kind of get in with, you know, PR agency, marketing agencies, they have these brands, and then now their job is to kind of hire the photographers, the content creators, the videographers. And that's where it's like if you can kind of be a favorite for an agency or one or two people at an agency, they'll just kind of call you for everything. So
Hmm.
I feel like that's a good approach for photographers, is not just thinking like, okay, maybe I'll DM this brand, because oftentimes the person, you know, running the social media is an intern or whoever, you know. It's like
Yeah.
thinking like, okay, how can I find, I'd say starting local, like, are there any food and drink agencies in my
Hmm.
area?
Mm-hmm.
or my closest major city, and figuring out like, how do I have a meeting with someone there, or can I share my work with them, finding a contact there. And I feel like that's a good place to start versus just thinking I'm going to hit up Patron tequila or Coca-Cola. It's like
Yeah,
start
yeah.
with an agency, get in good with an agency. And I've found with a lot of ones like in the food and drink world, especially like New York agencies and all of that, they tend to like share some information with each other. One PR person told me they at least have a blacklist that they share of like,
Ooh.
these are photographers, kind of contractors that were like, these are the problem people. Do not hire these people. And they share that
Mm-hmm.
with other agencies. So that I
Mm.
thought was really interesting because it's like,
Yeah,
oh, like if you really
yeah,
annoy somebody or you mess
yeah,
up are just difficult to work with,
yeah,
that gets around, you know? And
yeah.
similarly, I'm like, she didn't say this, but I'm like, well, they likely recommend contractors to other agency people too. So that's where I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I got in with a few agencies, partially because like I'm good at what I do, but also because like always tried to be a decent human. I tried to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
back to my emails, and I try to like deal with people as
Yes.
respectfully as I can, even when it's difficult. Just like being a good person goes a long way. So
Mm-hmm.
even with a client is difficult or things, it's like oftentimes I might complain to my wife or someone, but when it comes to dealing with the client, I always try
Yeah.
to be as respectful and courteous as I can, and try to go above and beyond with clients. Just because like I want them to recommend me. So uh
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. It looks like you've been delivering the client experience that everybody talks about, the exceptional client experience. Like, the
yeah,
the ultimate aim is that if a client works with us one time, we want them to go away saying, I never want to work with anyone else.
right.
And it sounds like you've kind of created that rapport with the agencies and the people that you work with, that it's not just the
Yeah,
quality of your work, but it's the experience of working with you. That
yeah,
is a fabulous tip. I think just, finding agencies, and it doesn't just have to be an agency in your area. There's so many
right.
global agencies, and they'll just
Yeah,
be like, I'm looking for creators or photographers in Singapore. They are
yeah,
always looking out worldwide. We live in such a global world now.
yeah,
Absolutely love this tip. So tell me, Jordan, like,
yeah,
obviously right now you have a solid cutoff, like no projects under $5,000, right? But I'm pretty sure that it didn't start like that. And the probably one of the number one questions that most creators have when they start out as a business is, I don't know what to charge, I don't know what my rate should be. So how did you figure that out?
yeah. And honestly, that's the one that even just with my own educational stuff is trying to figure out how to make that easier for people, because it is
Mm-hmm.
such even after doing this for years and years, it's a tricky thing to figure out, because it really feels like the Wild West, where it's like,
Yeah.
one person's charging this, one person's not charging that. It's very weird. So for me, starting out, I had no clue. I was just charging hourly, very low fee sort of thing, just because like I have a whole new industry for me. And for me, it was really reaching out to a few other photographers that I noticed that were like working with some similar clients or working in my area, and kind of being like, hey, like I know this is awkward talking about money, but like would love to hear around what you charge or what you charge for. So sometimes that conversation doesn't go, some people are just weird about, or not weird, but just kind of a little more guarded about that stuff.
Yes.
Where for me, I'm all like, no, let's talk about it. This helps everyone to be more open about what we charge, or what we charge, or how we come up with our numbers. So I feel like I got a lot better as I started kind of hearing from a few other gracious photographers who are like, oh yeah, like I charge, this for my half day. And then I also charge for licensing. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, whoa, I need to be doing that. And like, here's what I
Mm-hmm.
charge for gear rentals, and and some of them even sharing like, well, here's an invoice I sent to this client, and kind of being like, oh, whoa, like I need to be way more
Yeah.
detailed about this.
Yeah.
There's also stuff like Joni Simon from the Bite Shot.
Yeah.
She's phenomenal
Yeah.
human. She shared a lot of stuff on pricing. She also has like this very cool pricing calculator of kind of
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, what your actual personal expenses are, and kind of using that to calculate kind of what your day rates or half day rates or hourly rates would be.
Yeah.
And then adding things like licensing and everything on top of that. So I feel like she's, a creator who gives out a lot of free information in the name of like, this helps me, this helps all of us, I've very much kind of tried to adopt that approach of like, like the more photographers who know how to be business smart is going to help all of us.
So true. So true.
It's like every time a client hires a photographer, they're learning how to work with a photographer. So if they hire someone who's like, $500 for a bajillion photos and perpetual usage and all that, that's what they're going to expect every time. Yeah. And that's teaching a client something that isn't right. That's not how you should treat a photographer or expect from a contractor, So that's where I'm like, the more photographers who can know, the more nitty gritty of the business side, the better. But that said, it is tricky because it is something where it's not as easy as just having, here's a card with this, and this. It is very situational, right?
True.
Like every client's different, every job's a little different. It's something that involves more sitting down, quoting it out versus here's a price list, so everyone kind of wants that price list, right? Everyone wants the menu, the kind of like, it costs this, boom, you're done. And for things like wedding photography, I feel like that works because, more or less it's like, all right, there's a ceremony, there's a reception. It's a similar formula each time, maybe with a few variables to where like, I feel like you can have a rate sheet and it makes sense. But with commercial work, there's just so many variables of like, is this a mom and pop brand or a big international conglomerate? Is there going to be paid advertising? Is this going to be on billboards or is this just going to be a recipe card that they're giving out at an event? There's just so many very big variables to where I feel like just having a rate card doesn't really make sense. You kind of have to be able to like actually talk with the client and be able to assess kind of what those individual things are. So it is complicated, and I get why, especially if you're new to commercial photography, the headache of it. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to teach it. Of like, all right, here's the start out. Here's how to factor licensing, because I get it. It is a headache.
It's complicated.
Sure.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
I want to say three things. I really want to say three things. One is that, exactly what you said. That is, if our project scope is different, then how can our rate be the same? Then obviously we customize and we tailor our rates based on the project. It's not a menu or a cookie cutter approach. That's number one. The second one is that it falls back to the point that, my observation about you, and that is that you do not fear judgment.
I do, though. I just, make it seem like I don't, but
But, okay, then let me just frame it differently, that you're not shy to ask for help. Let me just say that. Because in the beginning, how many of us really do go and message other established photographers or ask people for help? Hey, I'm setting out in the market. Can you help me out a little bit here? And especially after not hearing a positive response from somebody, you're like, nobody wants to share this. I'm just, I don't know what they think about me. I'm not going to ask anyone else. And it's very natural that after 2 or 3 such responses, you'll be like, I'm just going to do what I want. And then obviously you're not using your, the best information out there to form your decision about pricing. So you didn't give up. I mean, even though you heard. So I feel like you asked for help, and that is something that we must always do, And then my third point is about Joni Simon. We just finished a 2-part pricing series on this podcast with Joni, and it was
cool.
It was mind-blowing. We released it over the last 2 weeks, and I completely agree with you that for creators, we're so grateful for creators like her who are just putting out all this information in the market so that it helps the community. Because by charging low, we are doing ourselves a disservice, and we are doing the community a disservice. So I absolutely love this. I feel like this is such a great start, or a great way for somebody to think about pricing when they are setting out. But what about projects? So for you, you definitely had your niche. You're like, I'm a beverage photographer. I'm going to photograph drinks. All right. But how do you judge that a project or a client is really the right fit for you? And especially because you're so particular about it yourself. You're like, if I'm going to work with an agency, I have to give out a good experience. So I'm pretty
Right.
sure that you're kind of looking for that for yourself as well. So how do you
Yeah.
judge a project that whether it's a right fit or it meets your criteria? What is your criteria rather?
Yeah. For me, obviously, like it has to be somewhere in the kind of beverage hospitality world. Strangely enough, I've been getting requests for doing like fragrances, like shooting,
Hmm.
cologne and stuff. Where it's like
Liquids.
I get that. Like, yeah, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, it is liquid. It's like
Yeah.
oftentimes fragrance bottles look kind of like little liquor bottles, and
Mm-hmm,
I've just kind of been like,
mm-hmm.
I don't think that's for me. Like I could see how there'd be like probably some of my skills would translate to that of like shooting a glass bottle and all of that, but
Yeah.
still
Sprays.
being able
Yeah.
to show off, yeah, all of that, but still being able to show a fragrance and styling that, it's like it feels too different to me
Mm-hmm.
personally. Where I'm like, and it's also like I'm busy enough in the beverage world where it's like I again haven't felt that need to expand there, but there's also a certain level of even within the beverage world or even just the booze world, the alcohol industry, there's certain brands that are clearly kind of not don't really hold my values of cocktails and consuming alcohol more as a culinary experience. Like for me, it's never been like this, means to an end of like, oh, I'm drinking to get drunk sort of thing, which for a lot of people, that is what alcohol is. For
Yeah.
me, it's
Yeah.
always been about discovery and learning about the spirits and the different, it's like not just, oh, tequila for the flavor. It's like, oh, there's this whole very rich heritage and culture behind tequila and mezcal and pisco and cognac and like all of these very incredible products that we just see on the liquor store shelf. It's like have these incredible stories and people and history behind them, and that just makes it even more awesome to me. Where
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's the experience of drinking, and yeah, you get a little buzz, but it's like
Yeah.
there's so much more to it. There's so much that you can learn in making the cocktail, but also learning about the stories outside of it.
Yeah.
So with that, there's just some liquor brands that like push more into
Mm-hmm.
the party side of the world. That's where like a lot of my stuff on social media, I kind of make fun of vodka because I'm like, it doesn't taste like anything. It's a waste of a spirit, and that's a joke. But there's also a side of a lot of vodka brands push into like, well, yeah, it's like there's a reason vodka is the most popular spirit because you can drink it easily and get drunk
Mm-hmm.
easily. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of brands, not all of them, there's some great craft vodka brands who whatever, but a lot of their marketing and kind of their brand story is very focused on the party side, or
Mm-hmm.
and that's just like not what I'm
Hmm.
about.
Hmm.
And that's where it's like, I don't know, with photographing that, it's like, okay, I guess I could do that, but there is a level of like kind of, I think because of the social media side of kind of putting myself out there a little more, it's like, okay, every client I take on, I do feel like I'm attaching my own name or I'm kind of giving it my approval sort of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's kind of
Yeah.
overinflated self-importance in a little ways, but for me, I think at least for me personally, it's like I don't really want to work with a client that doesn't really line up with that personal
Yeah.
approach of
Yeah.
the culinary experience of drinking and
Mm-hmm.
of cocktails,
Mm-hmm.
just because there's definitely a gap there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to sound judgmental of like, yeah, it's like some people just want to party and that's fine to a certain level, but I'm like, I also want to have functioning organs, so for me it's very much like about restraint and enjoying the experience versus just
And also focusing on the science of cocktail making. I think that
sure,
fascinates you. You want to bring that out to your audience. I think the history of beverages and cocktails, like how did a spirit even come to the world?
right,
Like I feel like
yeah,
you also want to bring that story. That's your storytelling part. And so I guess
yeah,
that also ties into your values. It's pretty much like food, right? There are some food photographers who only work with organic food products or
sure,
only vegan or only farm raised, I don't know, animals. I don't know. So it's
yeah,
everyone comes from this place of what they believe in. And I guess that becomes such a great way to find a project because whatever you put out, you are influencing somebody, you are putting that
sure,
out. It's affecting them in some way. So I love that. That's definitely your number one criteria for deciding who you work with. Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So,
And
yeah.
are there other like business principles that you would be like, I will never work with this kind of a brand in my life? Like, are there other, maybe one or two more values or principles you're like, oh, this is totally not me. I'm not going to, work with them. Is there any other value that you totally stand for?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's tricky because sometimes you have to either work with a client for a little bit, or you kind of do like oftentimes the projects I take on just because of dollar value too is like, okay, there has to be like a multi-step kind of, maybe it's like an ongoing retainer sort of thing, or like a project that'll take a few months to complete or whatever. So with that, there's oftentimes almost like, all right, let's kind of commit to a portion of a project to make sure we're a good fit together. So for me, like that's something I do a lot, where I'm like, okay, like we have this big scope in mind, but like let's at least sign the dotted line on this portion of it, because it's protecting myself, but I'm also framing it as like, this is protecting you too, because if we get third of a way through a project and you're like, maybe this isn't our guy, then you have an out. And if we get through and I'm like, this client isn't good for me, I have an out. And you have to be really clear about those things and like those dates and kind of what you're committing to, what you're not. So you have to be really, really clear about that up front for that to work. But for a lot of projects, and again, it's more kind of longer term projects, it's kind of setting like this, let's do this portion of the project, or let's work together for a month, an ongoing thing, and let's see how that goes. And then we set a time and like, let's both review. Like, did you like working with me? Did I like working with you? Are there things we could improve or change on? And for me, oftentimes if I sense like a client, like for me, mutual respect is really important. So I guess that's a value of like being respected as a professional, not just you're a contractor that we can push around and demand stuff from. So I get like clients oftentimes get some weird demands, or it's stuff that kind of comes out of nowhere. They're like, oh shoot, we actually need this tomorrow. That stuff happens. But oftentimes it's just the way clients kind of frame that of like, hey, Jordan, we need this 6 hours, like make it happen, versus like, hey, I know this is additional to our scope. Like, let us know if we need to renegotiate fees, but we really need this in a day. There's just like a different way that people communicate, True. So if a client is very demanding and sometimes that's simply personality, sometimes that's all it is. But generally it's like, okay, if I can see there's clear like mutual respect, where I'm like, okay, you're a client, obviously we're respecting you and want to impress you and do well. You're the one paying my bills. But if that doesn't go the same way of like, oh, if I'm just treated like you're a contractor, we could get someone else, then I'm like, cool, get somebody else then. So there's that level of and again, I know that is hard too when you're starting out. Like I feel like that takes time. It at least took time for me to get to that level of confidence, really, to be like knowing, okay, a client, even if they pay well, but if I resent them through the whole project and after the project, it's like, that wasn't worth it. That's just burning me out, and that's just ruining a career that I really enjoy. And that's something I honestly am still learning. Like there's a client I have right now where I'm like, I think I need to have a hard conversation because I'm not sensing that mutual respect, so that's something I continually have to remind myself of. But, but that's
it's a tough balance. Sure. It's a tough call, especially when you're starting out. You're like, do I take it? It's going to at least bring in the revenue, or do I stand for my values? And then you're like, heck with the values. Let's get the bank balance going, right? But it's such a tough. It's because over time, it affects the way we are seen in the market. People who we work with, our brand perception is also equally important, and who we associate ourselves with. And then it also affects how passionately we feel about what we do. And when we start working with clients we don't really like to work with, it kind of diminishes that fire in our belly to, work harder, to get more client projects. It can take away that joy as well. So it's so important to kind of, as tempting as revenue is, to keep these values always in front of us, where are we giving way and to what? So I think I had one huge name in Singapore. and they were a fast food joint. And they are like the local equivalent of McDonald's. And they were like, hey, we'd love to get into a food photography project with you. I went and I saw the menu, and it's like fried food, like fried after fried. And I am a lot about, the healthy eating and, consciously sourced products. And a lot of my clients come from that kind of a background. And I was like, do I really want this name? I mean, it would have been wonderful for my portfolio. It would have been a very lucrative project. But I was like, do I really want to associate my brand with something like that? Then I was like, you have to make tough decisions. And
right.
If McDonald's approaches me, maybe I'll have a different stand.
Yeah.
But again, it's the value and who you're associating yourself with. It's a tough call. So totally. I love that answer, Jordan. So we've talked about so many things today. I think you're leaving our audience with such a promise of, that when you find something you love, just go after it and don't get distracted. Try what you have to, but at the same time, if you're really feeling something in your gut, just go at it and relentlessly, and you're going to see results. People say riches are in the niches, right? So that's it. So niche. Yeah. So beverage photography is definitely that. You've demonstrated that so brilliantly. And I feel a lot of people will see beverage photography in a very different light. I want to end our conversation with like your, a boost of energy or your top advice that you can give to photographers out there who are like, oh my God, is this meant for me? Am I supposed to be here? Like who want to build a business in beverage photography or videography. What would be your top advice for them?
Yeah, that's hard. At least for me, when it comes to, like I said, like the riches in the niches of just like pursuing the thing you want. Like there is a certain level of I got started doing it because like I just like loved cocktails, loved taking photos, and it was kind of that simple. Obviously it wasn't, there's a lot more to it, but like that level of like, okay, this is something I enjoy doing so much that like and that's where I said I got lucky a little bit, where I know it's like, yeah, lots of hard work too, but there's a certain level of like, it ended up being the thing. But it was also like, even if this wasn't the thing, if I didn't get another beverage client or liquor brand hired me, it's like I'd probably still do this because I really enjoy sharing cocktails and everything that goes along with that, and the education side and also the community side of like, there's something about giving someone a cocktail that you made for them, and it's just like very fun, and it's just something where I'm like, I'd probably still be capturing this and shooting this and sharing about this whether I was paid for it or not. And that's where it's like, if you can find that thing for you, that's where it's like, I don't want to feel like you're guaranteed to make money doing it, but it's more like figure out what that success means for you, I guess, because I think success for a lot of us is we hope that means you can make it into a career or you get paid doing it, but maybe that isn't success for you. Not every photographer is as kind of niche down of like, I only shoot something that's liquid or I only shoot watches. It's like some photographers are very specific, but it also doesn't mean like you don't have to. There's definitely value in being really specific like that, but also like, like I said, with starting out, like I had quite a bit of time where I was like, I'm just going to try a bunch of different things and see what works. And that's where it's like, for you, maybe that's like, cool, beverage photography sounds really cool. I'm going to go for that. And then maybe as you go, you might figure out a certain aspect that kind of branches off from beverage photography. And you might be like, oh, wait, actually, that's the thing. And I don't know what that could be. Maybe that, some people like get into beverage photography from doing food, and they're like, oh, wait, I'm way more interested in the cocktails and the food, or maybe it's vice versa, and that's where there's a lot of value in the niche, in the really small focus. And I feel like a lot of educators, creators would tell you like, yeah, find your niche, find that thing. And I would say the same thing, where it's like, yeah, find a focus. That focus might lead to a better focus for you. It's like if everyone was beverage photographers, that'd be kind of a bummer. It's like get into beverage photography, get into food photography, whatever like you're interested in, and then you might discover something along the way that maybe overlaps or that you wouldn't have found otherwise that is an even better fit. So with that, it's like, find the niche or the niche, however you say it, find that focus, but be open to to whatever, because who knows, like
Yeah.
there could be something even better waiting for you just a little ways down the road. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that's part of the fun. You know, we always talk about the hustle of being a creative and all of that. And it is a grind and a lot of work, but it's also the fun aspect of it is like it's part of being a creative. Like you can change it up. You can do something different if something you're more excited about comes
Yeah.
along. And that's where it's like you might as well just try something and then be open to other possibilities.
Yeah, I think being open, that's such a great tip, because you began your journey thinking wedding photography was where it was at, right?
Right.
And then along the way, beverage just popped up as something that you felt so passionately about. You never know unless you give it a chance. And if you start with a very, prejudiced mind or a very fixed mindset, then you could probably just stay in the box for a long time, feeling frustrated about your choice. But yeah, just being open, because what's there to lose? What's the worst that can happen, right? So love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Jordan. I think this has been such a spirited conversation. I love it. Before you go, Jordan, do you have a call to action for our listeners? Can you tell them where they can find you and all the cool stuff that you do?
Yeah. So kind of my primary social media that I'm kind of most known for is High Proof Preacher, as we mentioned. So that's kind of where I share a lot of, my cocktail imagery and content, and a lot of the educational stuff around making cocktails, as well as kind of the humorous stuff. And then separately, I have another Instagram called Cocktail Camera. That's also my website, cocktailcamera.com, where that's kind of my home base for more of the photography education and soon videography education too. So do e-courses there, share some different resources on a blog and, YouTube channel with free tutorials and all of that. So yeah, I do have Cocktail Camera Pro is kind of my main, like kind of big master class for drink photography for, it's a lot of food bloggers who have taken it, a lot of bartenders, a lot of people who have maybe some, photography knowledge. So it's kind of beginner to intermediate, where it's like you have to at least have a camera and kind of some knowledge of how to use it. And then it's a lot of specifics on, how to actually capture cocktails, how to set up your lighting, how to shoot in dark environments like bars and restaurants. There's a few lessons where I actually like have someone come with me to a bar shoot and I actually show you, here's how I set up my lighting.
Wow.
Here's how I capture a bartender in action, sort of thing. So yeah. And then there's like a little discount code for specifically for podcast listeners too.
Yes.
So,
thank you for that. So we have a discount code on the Cocktail Camera Pro course. It's a 20% off. So we'll link it in our show notes, because this sounds like a fantastic course, especially if somebody is really getting into the whole beverage photography world. Fabulous.
Yeah. And then, there's always free tutorials on the YouTube channel as well too. So it's always like trying to provide e-courses and good education, but also share some free stuff for people as well too, because it's always everyone's in different spot with their career and what they can and can't afford. So there's lots of great resources that you can check out too.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you so much. And I'm pretty sure that our audience will be so pumped listening to this conversation, because you've just opened up a whole new way of thinking for them, that you're just getting started. There's no limit to where you might end up. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing the beverage with the bee, and for gracing our podcast with your presence. Such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you. Honored to be here. Anytime you want me to come back, I'm down.
So that was Jordan. And tell me that you absolutely love this conversation. Well, Jordan has very generously offered a discount code on his Cocktail Camera Pro course. It's a 20% off, and you can get that by using the code MyFoodLens. And I'm going to link it up in the show notes and on the blog, so that if you are even remotely interested in beverage photography, I honestly cannot think of a better person to learn from. So if you've been thinking of enrolling in a course, this is the one for you, my friends. I'm going to link it up for you. But overall, I hope that this episode really, really answered a ton of your questions. I feel like Jordan had the most amazingly fabulous practical tips. I mean, right from the point that you could work with agencies so that you don't have to do all the footwork yourself. to the point that, hello, reflections are good for you. And, also to the point that you never know what your passion is. So go and explore everything. I just feel like Jordan covered everything from technical photography to the business side and also real mindset shifting thoughts. That is such a big part of being in business, of running a creative career, and his approach of, we'll see where this goes and let's give it a shot. I feel like that's the best way to approach anything in life. And clearly, it has worked out so well for him. So I hope that if you have been stuck or if you've been wondering whether a creative career is for you, Jordan's story has left you with inspiration and knowledge and information on how to do that. And especially if beverage photography is where your heart is, I mean, who better than him to kind of show us the way? What a brilliant conversation. I absolutely loved it. And if you did, then please do rate, review, and subscribe where you're listening. You know that your words, especially if you write us a few words of review, you know that it really, really helps me make the show bigger and better for you. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm at hello@myfoodlens.com or on Instagram at Dyutama_myfoodlens. So if you enjoyed this conversation with a drink, think about how light hits it and how it would photograph. So I hope that you had as much fun immersed in your drink as I did immersed in my iced tea and this conversation. I'll see you next week with another episode. Until then, bye-bye.